All right, gang, in many respects, we had some breaking news here. Protests really are breaking out all over the world against the globalist world order. We just uploaded a video on France's protests against Macron reaching new heights as protesters attempted to storm the theater where Macron was, and security forces had to whisk him out in order to protect him in the midst of all these boos and catcalls on the streets. Now we have reports on demonstrations in Germany and Ireland against Brussels-inflicted environmental restrictions. So we're going to take a look on the growing protests throughout Europe and how it signals a mass rebellion against the globalist world order. And if you stick with me to the end, I've got a great free gift for all of you, which you'll love. So stay tuned. But first, let's give a huge shout out to the sponsor of this video, and that is our good friends over at My Patriot Supply. My Patriot Supply food kits last up to 25 years in storage. They include these awesome breakfasts, lunches, and dinners. And if you act now, you'll actually save 40% on a 2-week emergency food kit when you go to my special website by just clicking on the link below. Now, this is a limited time offer, so you don't want to wait, especially for an emergency to happen before you react to one, right? Take action now by clicking on the link below. Save 40% off with your 2-week emergency food kit today. All right, so let's get right into it here. Protests have erupted throughout Germany and Ireland over the last several hours in a furious response to what else but the punitive EU regulations on the environment and agriculture. Long convoys of vehicles blocked roads in Berlin, the nation's capital, as well as Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg and Bremen and Hesse and Lower Saxony. Several hundred tractors blocked roads, shutting down traffic in protest to environmental regulations imposed from on high by the bullies in Brussels that protesters believe will, of course, hurt their jobs and industry irreparably. Now, the timing of these rallies in Germany wasn't random. They coincided with Berlin's International Green Week, which is actually a food and agricultural fair that's been going on for almost 100 years. But it has been the site of late of a number of protests in response to what many consider to be radically punitive measures imposed on farmers and agriculture in the name of saving the environment. A particular issue are policies regarding new animal welfare labeling and restrictions on the use of pesticides in order to actually protect insects, if you can believe that. Now, this is the second time in recent months that tractors have disrupted Germany's urban areas. Back in October of last year, just a few months back, farmers shut down city traffic in protest against similar punitive measures, again handed down from on high by none other than the bullies in Brussels, who are implementing a Green New Deal policy that's costing Europeans hundreds of billions of euros. Now, in the past couple of months, we've seen similar protests also break out in the Netherlands. Now, we did a video on this, which you definitely want to check out. I'll link it down below for you in the pinned comment section as well for your reference. Because we found that Dutch farmers ended up putting on massive demonstrations to protest new carbon and nitrogen emissions regulations from The Hague that imposed on them, even though Dutch farmers, by the way, are very well known for their environmental conscientiousness and quality and efficiency. But don't tell that to the globalist leftists in The Hague who claim that they're simply being forced by Brussels to try to meet the European Union's imposed emissions targets. So obviously this stoked quite the blowback among farmers. So Dutch farmers drove their tractors in slow-moving convoys to a massive rally in protest of these debilitating regulations, and the only two major political speakers that were allowed to speak at the demonstration were Geert Wilders and Thierry Baudet. Again, this is further evidence that workers and farmers have defected from the political left and have joined up with the nationalist populist right, this amazing political paradigm shift. So this is part of the reason why the nationalist populist right is ascending everywhere in Europe. It's stolen a major voting bloc. So what it appears is we're seeing the German and Dutch equivalents here of the Yellow Vest protests in France. We have to remember that the Yellow Vest protests were originally sparked by a carbon tax, if you remember. The Yellow Vest protests all started in response to a Macron-imposed fuel tax, carbon tax on commuters. If you remember, basically, what's been happening in globalist France is they've been going through a devastating process of deindustrialization where manufacturing jobs have been shipped in mass overseas to third world nations, All the while, like we talked in our last video, all the while finance and capital converge in the urban cosmopolitan centers like Paris. And so this process of deindustrialization has left rural workers, factory workers who live outside of the big cities where all the money is converged. It's left them highly unemployed. So in order to find a job, where do they have to go? They have to go into the cosmopolitan world, into the cities. The problem is that because the cities have been so gentrified with finance and capital accumulating in France's cities, the prices to live in the city have skyrocketed beyond anything working class can afford. So they can't work where they live and they can't live where there's work. So they're forced to commute sometimes an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours each way. And then on top of that all, what does Macron, the globalist, do? He slaps a fuel tax on these commuters in the name of curbing carbon emissions. And these guys absolutely blew up. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. So while the Yellow Vest movement has certainly morphed into a massive rebellion against globalism as a whole, we shouldn't forget that it all started as a massive rebellion against environmentalist-inspired carbon tax. Now Germany, we're seeing, is doing this, and now even Ireland. Irish farmers drove their tractors and converged on the streets of Dublin this week to protest the government's trade negotiations that failed to secure a better price for beef and Irish agriculture that protesters believe will have devastating effects on rural Ireland. And again, what we're seeing here in Ireland is exactly what we're seeing in Germany and France and the Netherlands. We're seeing this massive rebellion among farmers and the working class against a globalist structured economy that either ships manufacturing jobs overseas to third world nations or inordinately lowers the cost of goods so as to keep inflation at bay, thereby placing an impenetrable limit on wages. And this all the while executive pay has gone up inordinately, right? So that the gap between the workers' wages and the bonuses of executives is beyond belief. We have statistics now that really show this wage gap, throw it in relief. For example, in the United States, back in 1965, the CEOs of major companies were paid around 20 times as much as their average employee, okay? But as of 2012, CEOs were being paid more than an astonishing 350 times as much as their employees. I mean, you have to really get that, all right? 1965, CEOs are getting 20 times the salary of their employees. 2012, now they're getting 350 times the salary of their employees. We've gone from 20 times differential to 350 times differential in a matter of just a few decades. Here's another one for you, another stat that's so interesting. In 2015, Wall Street bonuses totaled $28.4 billion. All the while, the total compensation for all Americans working for minimum wage was $14 billion. The total compensation for all Americans working for minimum wage was just half of the total of Wall Street bonuses. Half of Americans work for less than $22 per hour, and yet the nation has never been richer. So wages should be much, much higher. And that, in many respects, is what the working class and farmers are protesting. They're protesting globalist economic conditions that allow the rich to get unbelievably wealthy, all the while putting strict limits on pay increases for wage earners. And this is an economic arrangement that simply cannot go on indefinitely. And so these mass protests going on throughout Europe really are just another indicator that the globalist world order is indeed beginning to crack. All right, time for your free gift that I promised. If you click on the link below, you can get my book, Uprising, How the Yellow Vest Protests Are Changing France and Overturning the World Order, absolutely free as an ebook download. Now, if you want to understand what really is, in my view, perhaps the single greatest threat to the globalist world order going on right now, then this is the book for you. So you'll discover the political, economic, and cultural dynamics that are all behind the Yellow Vest Uprising, why they're only getting stronger, and what it means for new political order in France and for Europe as a whole. Absolutely free as an ebook download. My gift to you, I only ask, my one request is that you please leave a review on the Amazon book page, which will help so much with Amazon's promotion of the book. And I can't thank you enough for that. Now, before you go, like I mentioned earlier, I just loaded up a great video on the latest protests in France, where Macron actually had to be whisked out of a Paris theater by security forces because protesters attempt to storm the theater. Things really are heating up in France, and I think you're going to love the analysis that we give. So make sure to click on the link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.